Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining the session. I appreciate Kelly for the opportunity here to speak about EdFi. So the title is Working Together for Early Childhood Program Interoperability. I thought that I'll give you some introduction about my background. My name is Sayee Srinivasan. I'm the Solutions Architect from EdFi Alliance, and I've been working with the EdFi Alliance for the past 5 years. This is for computer classes, so I can't see everyone, so I have to put back and forth. Prior to coming to the Alliance, I was working for the Department of Education, state of Nevada for 4+ years, and I also worked for the Department of Education of the state of Delaware for a couple of years. So my passion is working on the education space. So it's really interesting for me to leverage EdFi in other aspects of the K through 12 domain space. And early childhood is being my one of the favorite working domains. So you are all here because you have some data challenges, whether it's to do with the early childhood domain area or to do with the K through 12 domain spectrum. Let me just go ahead and do all of this. What are those challenges, right? The data is manual. In the case of K through 12 domain space or early childhood domain space, often the school districts have to upload the data to the state education agencies, right? It happens either nightly or it happens during the cycles, like 40-day cycle or 80-day cycle, 120-day cycles. So it's very manual, and state education agencies often have to download the data that's being uploaded by the district administrators. And data is old, right? As I said, it's not coming in near real time. It's a couple of days old or weeks old or months old. And data is partial, right? When educators are getting the data, they're only seeing a slice of students' information. Either it's enrollment data, demographics data, or program participation data. They're not able to get the 360 view of a student. And complex and fragile. The data systems that are supporting these individual programs or individual data domains are complex, and they're not sharing information seamlessly and securely across each other. And compliance oriented. So when you all know state education agencies are compliance oriented organizations. So the data that's coming into state education organizations are aggregate numbers. Like here is the total number of days that a student is present in a childcare program. And so it is not in a granular format. And then the other thing is far from the classroom. So I said, EdFi Alliance is playing a role in the data interoperability space. I thought that I'll give some background of who we are and what we do. EdFi Alliance is a subsidiary of Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. So which means the funding for the work that we do and the salaries our employees get is all coming from the Dell Foundation. And the mission of the Dell Foundation is to support families and children in the aspect of improving student performance. So any data directly or indirectly related to students' performance is what our goal is. So our goal is to improve students' outcomes or performance. So when teachers get the data, and if it is old and it's highly manual and teachers' instructional time is being used for getting the data or moving the data from student information systems to LMS systems or gradebook systems, oftentimes the precious instructional time is being wasted for uploading and downloading the data. So it's far from the classroom. So the data is not available in the hands of the teachers when he or she needs it, right? So that's one of the problems. And I alluded to how complex the data systems are in the back end, right? The data systems are operating in a siloed way, right? They're not connecting with each other, and they're not speaking the same language with each other in order to share the information. And if if someone has to make an enhancement or patch to one side of the system, the other side of the system breaks. So what does this mean in the interoperability space, right? What can we have? This is where the alliance plays a role, right? So what is the definition of interoperability? It is a seamless and secure way of transferring data across data systems. When I say across data systems, it could be your transportation system, it could be your student information system, it could be your childcare integrated management system, it could be your LMS system, right? These all have to be talking with each other. And there has to be a common data format that exists for them to talk to each other. So that's what that's what the interoperability is. How does EdFi Alliance play a role here? What we do here is we provide the data standard. That common language is what we define. So we have a huge community with us, and that along with the community, the EdFi team governs and publishes that data standard. So that's being called as the EdFi data standard. Along with it, we also provide the technology, the suite of tools. So I'm going to cover that in the next slide, but let's just take that this orange box with the gear icon here is what we provide. So we provide the data standard, we provide the API, which is that gear icon, and then the orange box is the operational data store, which is the database, EdFi database. So when agencies, when a school district or a provider or a state education agency adopt an EdFi data standard, what that means is it provides the ability for educators to have a full view of a student. So that means that they are able to provide the instruction with all the data supporting the teacher so that that personalized instruction is being delivered to students. So, and the teacher knows about the student's assessment results. Sorry, I'm going to minimize that. Assessment information. Oh, the student needs math coaching, the student needs English coaching, and so on, right? And the data is being transmitted over to the state education agency in near real time. So that's the core of EdFi's data standard and the surrounding technology that offers. The data can be in the hands of whoever it has to be in near real time, whether it's the state education agency or federal education, US Department of Education, or district sending from one district to another district. And the student or the parent can see students' information in near real time as well. So that's how EdFi Alliance enables interoperability in this space. And it expands to in the interoperability space, we have operationalized the data standard and the implementation in the K through 12 spectrum. We are looking to leverage that the same framework can be adopted for the early childhood domain space as well. So what do you get with EdFi? If you're a district or a state education agency, you get the data standard, which is that common language, and you get that operational data store, that orange box. So it's a comprehensive database. We provide that in the format of SQL Server or PostgreSQL, which is an open source SQL. And then the API. API is the application programming interface. What that means is it's a set of interfaces or contracts that we expose for the vendor systems. So in the early childhood domain space, it is that childcare management system providers, right? It could be Wonderschool. I'm getting my feet wet in the early childhood domain space, so I don't have a full knowledge of who are all the vendors who are playing in that space. So I'm just going to pick and choose Wonderschool. It's not that that's the favorite of me. It's just that I know of Wonderschool is acting in that space. And then the Child Plus, and then the COPA, and teaching strategy teaching strategy gold is being used across the country for assessment. So when those providers adopt EdFi data standard, then that means that they are compliant with that standard. They're able to speak that language. They're able to send the data in that format. through the API and land the data in the EdFi data standard. So what do you get? I mentioned that we have a big community surrounding us and supporting us, and they're part of our governance structure. So as we look through how the needs of the community, whether it's the early childhood or it's the K through 12, when we bring the community needs and the way that we bring it to the data standard, every step of the way, we have multiple layers in our governance structure that you all play a big role in our community in terms of bringing that as a core standard. So these pictures say what you get with EdFi, that common language, and you get by adopting as a vendor or as a district or a state education agency, you get the full view of a student progress, and ours is zero fees. What that means is, we are a subsidiary of Michael and Susan Foundation. So anything that we do towards improving student outcomes, it's free of cost. So the framework, the data standard and the API and the data store, they're all free. That doesn't mean that there is no cost involved on your end. If you are a state education agency, you are going to be adopting the framework, adopting the standard, and you're going to be hosting it. So there's going to be a hosting charge. There's going to be, the skill set is needed, the people resources are needed. So I always mention that this is like adopting a puppy. Yeah, the puppy comes in as free, but of course there's cost associated with you managing the puppy. Secure and protected. So the data is, we do have security inbuilt within our pipeline. So your data is going to be secure, and student privacy is important and it's built in our DNA as well. So we make sure that your data is secure either on the SQL Server side or on the PostgreSQL side. And nonstop improvement. We do adopt agile practice, Scrum practice in our pipeline, which means that we have. I said that there are multiple tiers in our governance structure, right? Like we have special interest groups, we have work groups, we have technology advisory group, and we have governance advisory group. So these are all the layers in our governance structure. So which means that if you bring in a need, and the need that I see right now is, EdFi needs to be expanding the early childhood domain to consume data from these providers, EL providers, right? So that's a need. So constantly, we have already formed an early childhood special interest group and alliances, and I'm facilitating that group. Many of the state education agencies are participating in that group. And I'm going to share some of the work that we have done so far in that space. So that is a nonstop improvement. As we hear the need, we form a special interest group and we address that need. And that becomes a core standard at some point. And support teachers' choice, right? We make sure, our mission is that we want to make sure that we are addressing the classroom, right? We're addressing the student, we're addressing the families. So that means the data has to be available to the educators. And when the data is available to the educators, because these vendor systems are compliant with the EdFi data standard, the teachers or the educators have the ability or the flexibility to choose the best of breed tools, right? If I'm happy with the gradebook system, I will choose that system as long as that system is in compliance with EdFi. So the teachers have the best choice of tools that they can choose. This is a repetition of what I've mentioned already. A teacher can full transparency of student learning, 360 view of the student, and the architecture is future-proof. What that means is when you have this EdFi framework in your agency, which means that you will have the ability that framework is robust, but you will keep extending or expanding that framework as you have to address the new needs. And I mentioned that the teachers have the ability to choose best tools. And it doesn't mean that just the teachers alone, anybody who's directly or indirectly related to students will be able to choose the best of tools as long as those tools are compliant with EdFi. And of course, there is that state, federal, and public reporting pipeline that exists because the data is combined in a comprehensive way in that operational data store that we provide. When you accomplish data interoperability, you can solve other challenges. And one example that I mentioned here is that early childhood challenge that we as a group are solving with the EdFi framework in place, or the standard in place. So this is a bullet point that I have noted here from the work that we have done, but I thought that I'm going to switch myself to the detailed slide deck since I have time, and since I have your time as well. So let me go ahead and provide some more details about the work that the early childhood group has done from Alliance's perspective. So I'm going to switch my deck. Nobody will be able to see that slide. So I'm going to. Okay, so I am going to summarize that slide. We have learned that several departments are playing a role in the early childhood space. Department of Education, Department of Public Health, the Health and Human Services, right? But since the EdFi Alliance plays a role in the education side, we just want to make sure our work needs to be directly addressing to what is the department currently doing, what is the future vision of the department in the early childhood domain space. So, well, what I did was that I assembled states that have gotten the PDG grant, the preschool development grant, and during the planning phase, as well as I'm not sure which phase that they are in. I'm guessing that they are in the second phase. You all can confirm whether they're in the third phase or the second phase. But I do know that some states have completed the planning phase and they've gone into doing the work for their second phase of the work. So we needed to have a starting point. Because when I looked at the early childhood domain data, like I was lost. Oh my God, this is as big as a K through 12 domain space. I needed to have a starting point. And that starting point, I figured out that to be, okay, what are they collecting right now? Let's start off with that. And let's see how we can standardize that pattern, that data collection pattern across all states. So I fixed myself on that what they're collecting right now. And this is what my discovery has led me to. And what they're collecting, so I'm going to go into each individual state basis and give you some information about what they're collecting at a very high level, not go into the data model level. If any of you are interested in knowing at a deeper level, the data model level, you have my email address at the end of this presentation deck. You can reach out to me. So let me address it at the very high level. All of the states are collecting publicly funded data, right? It's the public funded pre-K program or education that is being offered by a school district or by an educational service center. So Delaware is collecting that information, and they are collecting it through EdFi at this point. It comes in very similar to how the K through 12 domain data is coming in. And Delaware is also collecting if a student is, so here's how I see it, right? Funding is one aspect. What are the programs that are being offered under that funding? Whether it's the public funding and the private funding, what are the programs that are being offered to students? And what is the actual setting that the student is being placed in, right? Is the student going to a public school in a public district, or the student is going to a center-based education? These are all new things that I'm sharing with you. I'm sure you're all experts in this space. Maybe I'm repeating some of the things that you're knowing, but I just thought that the discovery that we did so far, I'll share it with you. If this is something old, please go ahead and dispose it. If there is anything new, you can take it. So private setting. So center-based education is students are being placed in there, right? And the funding could be coming from a school district or coming from a private endowment. So I learned that the private setting and public funding, states are collecting that data. So center-based education, states are collecting it. And then private setting and private funding, I am not seeing states collecting this information. So let's go with that assumption. And since I've categorized the data into all of those three buckets, public setting, public funding, private setting, public funding, private setting, private funding. So with that, I'm going to go into a simpler model. Okay, let me just say this. States are also collecting Part B information. Department of Health is collecting the Part C information. States are collecting 3 years through 21 years of students who are needing eligibility determination service, and as well as the special education service. So the eligibility is also being collected, and the services that are being provided to students are also being collected for 3 years through 12 years in EdFi. So I'm going to skip the model because Kelly requested me to skip the model. I am going to you can ignore the text, but at least I can explain. So the boxes are, in Delaware's case, what Delaware has done is they have provided a statewide eSchool. I don't know how many of you know eSchool Plus, which is a PowerSchool version of the student information system. So that statewide, so there's a differentiation there. The statewide eSchool instance is where this state-funded pre-K programs information is being collected. So if a student is attending state-funded like early childhood assistance program, that is being collected in the eSchool Plus version, which is one of their student information systems. It's part of PowerSchool. PowerSchool owns it, and a state is offering that as a statewide system to all these center-based education programs that are being state funded. So it comes to that statewide system, and from there it lands into the EdFi ODS. What information are they collecting? They're collecting enrollment information, they're collecting demographics information, program participation information, and so on. They're not collecting discipline, they're not collecting schedules, to my knowledge. So from private early learning centers where the state funding is coming in, it comes into the statewide system, and from the statewide system, it gets into the EdFi database through the API. So I'm going to skip all of that. So there are also unenrolled students, right? Students could be enrolled in a private school, could be homeschooled, could be not enrolled at all in any public school. But those students needing special education eligibility determination, and they also need special education services, which I talked earlier, that data is also coming from PowerSchool, from eSchool Plus districts in Delaware and coming into EdFi ODS. And the students are from 3 through 21 years. And I mentioned private setting and private funding. Delaware is not collecting it. So resources are available here, and I'm going to skip that. Nebraska offers 6 programs. Nebraska is also collecting anything that pertains to public funding, right? If there's a pre-K program that's being offered in a school district or in an ESU center, which is that education service units, it's like a collaborative wing that's there in Nebraska, and they're offering shared services for their districts. So if a program is being offered to students in that shared services center, then that's being collected. If it's being offered in a center-based education, private early learning centers, that information is also being collected. Student information is being collected. And home visitation is also, I address that center-based, and childcare partnership, right? Sixpence endowment is a private funding that's offered to school districts, and school districts offer these in a childcare partnership setting, and that is also being collected in EdFi in Nebraska. home visitation is also being collected, whether it's public funded home visitation or it's a private funded home visitation program. That information is also being collected in Nebraska. So this is all how they're collecting it in EdFi. So I'm going to skip that because it goes into the data model and the structures. Indiana. Indiana is also collecting the the public pre-K and the Part B, and then the non-public pre-K for students who are attending the accredited schools. So that all of that, anything where there's public, that they are collecting all of that information as well. Their vision is to collect first steps information, CCDF information, and county partnership information, Head Start and early Head Start. So the one thing is Delaware is collecting Head Start, and I haven't seen early Head Start, but Head Start information is coming in Delaware and in Nebraska too. In Indiana, that Head Start information is, they're wanting to collect that. They're not collecting it at this point. So everything that's accredited or public pre-K is what Indiana is collecting. I've already addressed the vision for collection for the future years is collect all of those Head Start programs and first step programs and CCDF and so on. Sorry, this is again, okay, so this is again very glary, and I'm going to go for a presentation class. My communication director said that she's going to give us a presentation class where we're going to learn how to use PowerPoint without this, because I haven't figured it out, how I should just draw diagrams without this being, glary. So forgive me. I'm going to just put the blame on, I'm not trained yet. So the state database resultant team has done the work, and this is a diagram that's coming from that work. So they've stated that, let's assume that if state is Indiana K through 12 Department of Education, they're already having EdFi ODS. If OE COSO, the Office of Early Learning, also has an EdFi ODS, in that case, it'll be acting as a state ODS, and your providers, maybe some of you are providers in here. So the data from Wonder School and CCDF subsidy, workforce licensing, all of those things would be coming in directly to the EdFi ODS at the Early Learning Office within the state through the API. And of course, the Child Plus and COPA for the Head Start programs will be landing their data as well directly from the provider system. So the primary focus in Indiana is having that real-time data. So in near real time, they want to have that data, and they do want to collect the attendance information and subsidy payment information. And of course, lessening the burden on the vendors, right? So you don't have to upload and download the data. By you directly integrating with the API, the data seamlessly should flow through the API and lands in the target database. And supporting transition to kindergarten, right? So I've heard this from South Carolina. The next few slides are from South Carolina. Dan Ralia, the data director, and we call him as CIO of South Carolina Department of Education. And he has a vision. And when his child is being transitioned over to kindergarten, he wants to know the full experience that the child has gone through in the early childhood years. And it doesn't matter, it's just entry into kindergarten. It matters even across the board, right? If a child is a teenager, being in 9th grade or 10th grade and getting into problem, we should be able to correlate to that early childhood experience that the child has gone through, right? So that is something that South Carolina has a vision for, to connect the early childhood data domain with the K through 12 data domain so that you can draw lines between those two. Assigning unique ID. So unique ID is probably one of the challenges that we might have to face initially to make these two systems talk to each other, right? When I say systems, those two data domains to talk with each other. So the unique ID should be playing a major role in here, because in the K through 12 domain space, the state unique ID is the way that you're tracking the student, right, from one district to another district. So we need to have a unique ID, a state unique ID being the primary driver, probably in the early childhood domain space as well. So that might be one of the first challenges that we might face when we are getting into the early EL spectrum. Financial data related to provider operations. I'm going to skip that. SC findings, same as other states. Public pre-K is being collected in the K through 12 domain in EdFi. They have a vision for collecting first steps, state-funded first steps, county partnerships information, private pre-K, Head Start, early Head Start, voucher programs. All of this data needs to be coming into EdFi, but they do have an intermediary agency, their fiscal services agency, that's going to act as that intermediary agency to collect the data from first steps and their CCIMS systems and Head Start, and then they're going to just send a subset of that data to EdFi. So there is that intermediary player in South Carolina's case that'll collect the data and send the data that is necessary for the Department of Education. And I already addressed the vision that South Carolina wants to connect the wholesome experience that the child goes through in the early childhood years with the K through 12 space. And Dan also raised a point that in our model, we don't have a big block of text that the student information systems can send. He said that I want to have a big text field to express the program description and students' experience, and that our parents' experience, whatever that is, to be accommodated in the EdFi data field. So a huge text field is something that he wants to have to describe about the program or about the experience. Interestingly, I noticed that South Carolina is the state that's collecting students' medical information. Who's the physician? What is the curriculum that they are going through? Which class? Are they in a 3K class or a 4K class? Things like that. So there's that level of detail that South Carolina collects, and we're looking into to standardize that pattern, the data elements that are part of that common standard. And like other states, as part of the kindergarten enrollment, that South Carolina also wants to collect, okay, what was the previous provider's or early childhood center that you attended, right? Have you attended it? And if so, what center did you attend? And who was the provider of that program? So that information is being collected across many states as part of the kindergarten enrollment. So I'm going to skip that model. And MN goes through the same findings as well, so I don't repeat that. It's there in the slide deck, public pre-K information. And they're also collecting funding information and aggregate attendance information and membership hours. I've seen that in Minnesota. We talked about Part B information is being collected in every state because the district is responsible for that. And 14 different early childhood programs are being offered in Missouri. And Missouri is running EdFi to collect. And Missouri actually, see, all of the other states, they've started with the K through 12 domain first. And Missouri is one state that's starting off with the early childhood in EdFi first. And then they're going to expand to K through 12 later. So same thing, home visitation, first steps, early Head Start. All of this are there that they want to collect as part of the EdFi domain structure. So the data is, early childhood data is coming in through the API, and we have expanded the model, the K through 12 domain model, to accommodate the early childhood domain data. And then it is going to be sent to their data warehouse for their reporting needs. So there are two standards that are playing a role here, EdFi and CEDS together in Missouri to collect the data in EdFi, and for reporting needs, we're using CEDS. Missouri is using CEDS standard. I think that's the discovery process. The next steps that what we are going to do is we have done the discovery. We now know what the states are collecting. So with this, can we come up with a common pattern? When I say pattern, it's the data model that could be common or standardized across these states. So EdFi Alliance is I'm doing the data model, and I mentioned that we do have a special interest group for the early childhood. So we're going to be meeting the first week of May, and I'm going to share out that data model with all of the members in that early childhood space, so that that common pattern exists across these states for collecting the data. And we realize that currently what the states have done is there's a common pattern in terms of what data that they're collecting, right? There's no model that's being common, right? So they've extended it in a way that they've extended the K through 12 to collect this data. So what we're thinking of doing is, okay, this space is also vast, huge, and there are a lot of data requirements in here. So this will be a separate domain. So when I call it as a domain, what that means is in our data standard, we have 16 domains. We have enrollment being a domain, assessment being a domain, demographics being a domain, program participation being a domain. So we just thought that the early childhood in and of itself exists as a separate domain rather than just being a one-off hanging off of the K through 12 domain space. So that standard pattern is going to be shared out with our special interest group members. That means the state education agencies, the first week of May. And then we're going to see what the future needs are, because when I did the discovery process, my brain was completely fatigued. So I'm like, okay, I want to just draw out the model, share it, and then we will get into the future needs of the states, which is going to be like other like, since they're already collecting the center-based education and county partnership in some states that are being already collected, early Head Start and Head Start, they'll all become part of that model that we are going to put together now. So we're going to see what the gaps are after May that we are missing, and maybe expand the model to collect those gaps as well. So that's what is going on from the Alliance's perspective. I hope that this was helpful to all of you, and I'm here till 11 o'clock, and please go ahead and ask me questions because I want to learn from you all as well. This is a new area for me. Yes, please.
My name is Norbert Haupt. I'm a vendor. When you started talking about the database, I thought immediately, oh, there might be a unique student ID solution here. But then you later said that I call it the SSID, state student ID. Then you said that that's not really in there yet, right? Or did I?
No, it is in there. It is in there. Okay, so what that means is, here's how I'm going to say it. So the state unique ID is being issued by the state, right? The processes, the states are issuing that, right? And there's a system that is already existing across all states because they've been doing this. But what we have done is this data store or the database that I talked about, the EdFi database that I talked about, let me just go back to that slide and then I can explain to you what happens. Or since you're being a vendor, give me a second. I have a neat slide that talks about the relationship between the state unique ID and the database. Is that okay?
Yep.
Thank you. Let me point out what I'm talking about. So the gear icon in here, and this is the EdFi framework, EdFi data standard, and technology, right? And this is the identity, the state unique ID system. So they already have a unique ID system. We don't want to reinvent the wheels for states. So what this means is there's an arrow going back and forth between the EdFi and the unique ID system. So for example, if a student is getting enrolled, so I always take this scenario, the enrollment scenario. So John Smith is coming into a school district called Grand Bend ISD in a middle school called Grand Bend Middle School for 7th grade, right? So the registrar is at the district is going to type in his information, right? This is a new student. The student does not have a unique ID, right? So when they type in that initial criteria for the student, the first name, last name, date of birth, and gender and grade level, so it comes through the API, that minimum information from the student information systems, and it knows that, oh, the student doesn't exist. Then that means that I have to connect to the unique ID system that the state has. It's the outside system.
Right.
Yeah, we have a hookup point. That hookup point takes the input from the student information system and sends it to the state unique ID system. And the unique ID gets issued and comes back to the SIS. And now the SIS will then fill up John's information, like the demographics, the programs, and things like that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to just add that I think the EdFi model has the unique ID in it, but in the early learning space, we don't have a unique ID because there's so many different places that might occur.
That's exactly where I'm going. Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have a unique
This
ID.
room are the
because-
ones that have the babies coming into the system long before K-12, right?
Exactly.
So we're the ones that are creating that first record and need to have a good way to get it in there. And you just answered the question. Yeah, if we create a new record of a newborn coming into the system,
Right.
then through your system, we can get the SSID created and then becomes part of the record. So for K
Correct.
later on, it's already belongs there.
Yes, it exists. So after it gets created and after you package every other information, send it to our database,
Yep.
then that unique ID exists. And that's how the student is being tracked.
So the unique ID, let's say it starts at the infant age, if you enter them into the system, and then there is a way for that to carry on once the child goes into the ISD.
So I'm going to speak from the Department of Education perspective. If the Department of Education is issuing the unique ID for an infant, then it has to be there. If DOE is responsible from 3 years through 21 years, then that unique ID is there. So it depends on the Department of Education. So as long as they are issuing from infant through 21, the system has it.
From the DOE perspective, in terms of, because obviously with each state you're dealing with a different DOE, does EdFi actively reach out to state DOEs to try to work with them, or do you wait for the states to talk to you?
No, we don't wait for the states. Okay, so.
That's good. I mean,
Because the way, okay, I touched on our governance structure, right? How we publish our data standard, how we publish our framework, I touched on it. But I didn't touch on our working process. The way the model works is this. So I said that my primary responsibility is to work with the state education agencies and urban districts. So large districts, Houston ISD, Chicago ISD, New York ISD. So name it, that I work with them, all of those districts and states. So what that means is there's a funnel, just that we call it as an user journey, right? There's the funnel is that if you are a new state, right? I'm going to take Vermont as an example because you spoke about Vermont and you said that some of your relatives are in Vermont, right? I heard it and okay, Vermont is coming in the picture right now. So I'm going to take that as an example. So what Vermont would be attending conferences or seeing it on our website or has listened to our, talk in one of those conferences or hear from other CIOs, right? From other peers. Somehow they heard about EdFi, right? So Vermont, okay. So I have a pain point and the pain point is that I'm not getting near real-time data in my system. I need to have that. I don't have my teachers getting the data on time and my backend data system is complex. And it's so it's 15 years old, right? So these are all some of the pain points that we have heard from states. So Vermont would reach out to us because from our website, they go to our website, from our website, that my contact information is there. Maureen Wentworth contact information is there. So, and there's also a general pipeline that they would just say that create an account. We let them create an account. Doesn't mean that ours is, we're open source. So when I say tracking, we want to know who our community members are so that we can support them. That's just the aspect that so if Vermont goes and creates an account through our Salesforce pipeline, we will know that Vermont has created an account. So from there, my work starts. So I reach out to Vermont. We saw that account being created. Let us know how we can help you. Tell us what your problems are. Here's how EdFi can accommodate and meet your needs and so on. So along that support pipeline, the onboarding, we call it as onboarding work. That onboarding work, if I have to say, for Texas Education Agency, we've been supporting them for the past 2 years. So starting from the time that they've said that they want to upgrade till now that we have been supporting, and we're going to be supporting them until they go into production and so on. So the work is not limited to just 2 weeks or 3 weeks. In some instances, it goes years. So.
I just want to ask a quick follow-up question.
Yes.
Like with working with all the different states, what have you found has been the greatest barrier to entry for a lot of these states in terms of like what's preventing states from fully adopting the EdFi model?
Right. Many of them, because we have to know what the barriers are so that we can just address some of those barriers, right? Leadership commitment should be there, right? And funding, of course. Like I said, this is like adopting a puppy, right? And the team has to be, there needs to be either FTE or consultants or consultants, I mean, as individual consultants or company system integrators, we call them. So, of course, it all boils down to funding at that point, right? Commitment and funding. And then they have to, in some places where they have started, but it wouldn't progress, right? And I call them as barrier too. And what are those barriers that they've stalled, right? And that's because that they've looked at the picture in multiple different aspects, like they want to address chronic absenteeism, they want to address transportation, they want to address federal needs, they want to address. So when you have all of this together at the same time, you're not going to have quick wins. So we always tell states, the states that we have seen being very successful are the ones that have the leadership commitment and that have taken only a small number of use cases. Just think small, think small, think small. That's what it is. So
sorry. So I'm just trying to piece this all together. So we are having conversations in our state about the ECE, so this early childhood integrated data system, which I'm sure some of you guys know about. So is that the what, and EdFi would be the how of how, like once we decide what that integrated data system would be, because it could be home visiting, it could be subsidized childcare, it could be public school pre-K. And then if that's true, have you worked in, you're talking a lot about the state education agencies, but in Texas, all those things in multiple state agencies. So how does EdFi work with multiple state agencies and how does that? I'm just trying to piece it all together.
Okay. So let me take the small state,
Sure.
Just Delaware as an example here, right? And then we can just go into Texas and you can tell me how Texas is different than Delaware.
Oh,
I think
Right.
my headache.
I know in terms of number of students, Delaware is different than Texas. Right, so we have two models, right? We have ChildPlus, COPA, and other providers probably, or here you can name your system. Wonder School is there, right? So you have all these provider systems and Teaching Strategy Gold, right? And we're already working with early childhood assessment providers in Texas. So Texas state is making it as a mandate for the assessment providers in the early childhood space to send the data into EdFi. So that effort has already been going on. So the way that I want to give a background. So the way that we have made success in the K through 12 space is approaching the national vendors, the big vendors. So maybe that's the approach that we will have to take to go after the big vendors in the EL space and ask them to send the data directly over, right? But if there is going to be an integrated system, like in Delaware, that statewide eSchool Plus system that I've shown in Delaware, if that is acting as a needy intermediary system, and even in Minnesota, not in South Carolina, that they have fiscal services having that ECIDS system as an intermediary system that's collecting the data from all of these providers, which is very detail oriented, but this DOE requires only a subset of the data, that's a possibility too. So where there's a direct integration from those providers, you can have that directly sent over to DOE. But if DOE is not authorized to collect all the data, but only a subset of the data, then in that case, the statewide system has to be, that CCI EMS has to be there as an intermediary to collect the data. Yes.
So, okay, so I'm just trying to put this in my mind because I am teaching strategy school and I
perfect.
have been working on this whole
Perfect.
side. Yeah, I know.
Perfect.
So, so once we have all of our EdFi certification and all of that in place, then if we're looking to work with the Early Learning Council to the ECE, all of that is just gonna, we don't have to do anything extra because we already have our EdFi certification, or so we have to do something extra.
So this is where I have to, that's why I asked your name, please, because
Kimberly Howard.
Kimberly Howard, and you are?
I'm
Teaching strategies.
Both of you are Kim?
I'm not. We're both Kim.
Yes, we're both Kim, we work
Howard
together.
and Kaufman.
Yeah, Howard and Cochran, that's the way we,
So both Kim, but,
Yes.
so I want to learn from her, because she works in Texas.
Right.
And Texas is dear to my place, so
no,
I.
I do
They
too.
both do.
Yeah.
Oh, they both do.
Yes.
Okay, so in your case, let's assume that you got the certification. That means that you know how to integrate with that fact, right? And now in Texas, if CCIMS is going to act as a system in the intermediary phase, to my knowledge, CLI, because I'm working with CLI Engage,
Because everybody has to have it.
everybody has to have it. So the Texas is asking them directly the data coming from the vendors to the
Right.
state.
Right.
So this is where I need some coaching. How is your relationship going to be from the council perspective with the providers in there? Because in the Texas state, the data is coming from teaching goal, the teaching strategy, and CLI and HUI.
Okay. I don't know yet.
Okay, you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the council's just starting that conversation, so like, to develop this ECE. So I'm just learning and trying to make it connect.
So maybe the council can read the data from Texas. That's a possibility. If you're needing that data for your other purposes,
Yeah.
the council probably will be getting the data because the data is directly coming into the state.
Yeah.
So then that data can be transferred over to you.
Yeah.
That's,
And I
you will
manage,
be reading the data.
I would be leading, I'm just part of the council, but yeah.
and I manage the state data collection for the ECDS reporting process.
Oh, okay,
So
awesome,
I manage all of that.
for the state, okay,
Yeah.
great.
I do
Plus,
have a question
yeah, for
about
teaching strategy,
that.
yeah.
So teaching strategies. So I'm from Iowa and we have an umbrella agreement, right? So that means the state pays a certain dollar amount and then under the umbrella agreement, everybody has different. fee that they pay
Licenses
per-
because you purchase under an
portfolio.
umbrella.
So the data, that assessment data then, where do we have to get into details about data sharing, data use? So already our state knows that the teaching strategies goal of data is going to be put into our state longitudinal data with DE, right? So that's that. It adds another layer, then we put it into our ECE. do we have to change, and maybe we don't know the answer to this, any type of legal language for families awareness about, it's gonna be here and it's gonna be here, and it could be population pulled out here. That, that's one of many examples. You could throw out, even Wonder School,
Yeah,
Bright
right.
Wheel, any of that.
Yeah, and we have a general blanket statement of saying, you need to do what you need, inform the families of where and what needs to be done. I do happen to manage another state contract with the Texas Workforce Commission and things like that. And we have a blanket statement that goes out to families, to programs, et cetera, that states that, that data aggregatedly will go all the way up to the state for people to review. Will we review individual children, things like that? Yes, we will for, reporting purposes, but it doesn't get reported up individually to state and things like that. But yours will, as does through the TEA, because I manage the TEA stuff with. So those are two different agencies for that. So you do need to probably inform families about that because they do have the right to know where the data, child's data is going.
I'm going to take this as an action item on my end because I want to, I'm not sure if you work with Scott Johnson and Deanne Schiffer. I'll reach out to them and ask them that what is the data sharing agreement between Texas Department and the ECE system in terms of sharing, because the data is coming into, and in your case in Iowa, it's going into your SLDS system, the longitudinal
Right,
system.
and I want to put it in our ECE as well.
Exactly.
And that's what the new layer will be.
Right.
Because
And
we will
if
do
we're
other things.
thinking about that too, we'll need to be making sure that we're having that same conversation.
Right. So from EdFi's perspective, I can just speak that at that point, if the data needs to be there on the ECIDS system side, then it will be a readout from the EdFi ODS at the state level, from the state level to the ECIDS.
Does EdFi provide like guidance? Do you have people that would provide guidance to states on that, like in terms of?
Assessment certification?
Yeah, like legal.
I am working with CLA
Okay.
right
Like the
now.
whole
So
legality.
exactly the process that I said that they come to, okay, when State Scott and Leanne Schiffer convey the message to all of the assessment providers in the EL space, and CLA and Dave said that, oh, okay, we're ready. That's how do we work, right? Immediately Scott looped us in, and then we've been working with CLA Engage in terms of, okay, here's our sandbox. Let's go ahead and get the data flowing. Let's just check the data. And this is your credentials and things like that. And if they have any questions, we answer them. So there's a check-in process that's there with the providers. So it's not that, see, another thing that you asked, right? What are the barriers? So the one thing that we felt that on the assessment integration side, we felt that we had all the documentation. Our tech docs is 6,000 documents out there. But then we're a small team. Right, so, but we felt that just handing over the documentation and asking them to go ahead and integrate is not a good approach.
They can't read that. I mean, they'll read it.
Yeah.
No, they can speak that language, but since somebody is out there, just removing all of those blockers as they are coming in would be a great thing. So we found this, that Texas has the pilot phase, right? Pilot phase for assessment integration, pilot phase for system integration. So I'm part of those calls. What's the CLI Engage and removing any of the blockers that they have and the questions that they have. And unique ID was one of those things that, and validation. They had several questions about the validations. How would API provide the validations? And whether it's a tier 1 validation or tier 2 validations. So yeah, that support is there.
So I have two questions. First of all, have in the special interest groups that you were talking about all ago, are you including vendors like teaching strategies and things like that to help guide those conversations through all of that and things like that?
Great question. Great question. I once again have to go to that barrier question because we learned that with all of these groups and discussing and the outcome of that, we cannot eliminate the vendors as part of that. So what we do is they don't want to be, rather than me say, they don't have to be part of that discovery process. So what I showed you is the discovery work that I've done, right?
Right.
They don't need to be there because that's a communication between the state and the alliance. So we let them have their time. What we do is when we come up with a common pattern, when we have a common stand model, we assemble the players there, the vendors there, and show it to them that here's what we have come up with. Is this something that you'll be able to do from your system? Yes, we do include that.
Yeah, and so I guess I'm just thinking here, you know, because you've mentioned CLI Engage and teaching strategies gold, you know, and the differentiation there is CLI Engage is Texas only. Teaching
I
strategies
would
gold is
Yeah, across the
national,
country.
you know, it's national.
Correct.
And so, you know, we're talking about Delaware, we're talking about, I can't remember where you said, Iowa, we're talking about Pennsylvania, we're talking about, so when we talk about the EdFi certification thing that we're doing and our entire development team that is working on this platform and everything, it would probably be good for us to come to the table.
Totally. So what happens is Texas is, the state is driving that adoption, onboarding vendors work, right?
Right.
So CLI Engage came forward as the first pilot with Texas, correct? And I'm sure that they have lined up the next assessment vendor for their work. I can check with Scott to see, you know, when they're going to work with that teaching strategies gold. But when you come there, we're going to be part of that. Alliance will be, I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I know,
Sure.
we've got it all in the pipeline of our work,
okay,
so yeah, it's all in there,
okay.
in the roadmap. for the
Awesome.
development
To
work.
tell me, is there any concern that I should know about, anything that we have to improve?
You know what, I can't even, I'm not on the
That's not a
development
conversation
team.
for right now.
That's not, yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, we have a whole development team, because we're, you know, a digital company and stuff, so.
Okay.
And I don't know all the ins and outs of all the job work, I just look at the roadmap and see where things are. And,
Oh,
You're not the one with questions.
I just say this has to be done.
I see.
So, Eric, question of, that we need to have.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. So the ODS and the API, is that hosted by y'all or is that?
No,
something
no,
else
no.
Sayee
See,
hosts?
that's another thing, right? We only provide the standard, we publish that data standard and the framework, the technology. We don't own any of it. It's, you are taking it, you are hosting it, our mission is not to touch the student data. See, that's where that student privacy is, for you to manage your student data, and we don't see it, we don't do anything with it.
Okay.
And yeah, it's just you take the framework and post it.
And so it sounds like the tools to support it, so could somebody just implement the standard, for example, Texas could just implement an EdFi API on top of their ECIDs instead of having to stand up a whole like ODS and separate system that talks to their ECIDs.
Good question, right? So yes, it's between a specification, a vendor to vendor you're talking. The ECIDS system has a schema. When there's a data standard, there's a schema that's specification that's backing that data standard, right? The data standard is nothing else but a logical model, right? So logical grouping of the data. So I'm grouping all of the identification data as one group. I did demographics in one group, program participation in another group, right? So that means the backend database is a companion database that goes along with this logical data model. And so is that API. The API and the logical data model has a one-to-one relationship. If you see the API specification that vendors see, it's the same as our logical model. The backend database, you'll see some differences. But when you're talking about ECIDS system, right, it's represented in a different logical model, correct? That's different than, could be. It is different than EdFi logical model. So what you might have to do is, you might have to translate that EdFi model to the ECIDS model. As long as your API specifications are exposed in EdFi, you're okay with consuming the data from the vendors.
Yeah.
Through EdFi API, but land the data in ECIDS. And when you're landing the data, you have to have that translation.
Right, but you don't need to have the data stored as part of that translation if you don't want to.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah. If you don't want to, you don't have to. but you have to take that left, because at that point, you're not doing that, the API that's coming. JSON is the payload, right? So you have to be translating that JSON payload to whatever your SQL server schema is, or Postgres, or SQL.